One of the good things about Nostr is you're not going to be able to censor or the content's more pure.
Yeah.
But that might be a problem for its scaling because I think some people are like, I just don't want to deal with this shit.
Yeah. It's going to hit. It's going to have a problem at some point for sure.
Yeah. And it's whether it appeals to people. Yeah. I can see why it appeals to Bitcoiners.
Yeah. It's a Bitcoin chat room. That's why I like it right now. But if it gets too toxic or too crazy, that'll turn me off from it too.
Well, I just think, can it scale outside of a Bitcoin chat room? I can see why a bunch of Bitcoiners have naturally come to it. I mean, it suits them. They're in that kind of world of Bitcoin decentralization.
Yeah.
I don't think my brother, sister, friends give a shit about a decentralized Twitter.
No, not at all.
Sell it to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you enjoy last night?
I did. It was a lot of fun. As I was saying to Danny, it was just cool seeing some people in New York, a city that I love, but I haven't associated with Bitcoin before. And I know a lot of people flew in, but there were still a lot of local people here. And I met some bunch of different people last night. Some people that are like, oh, I'm really into Ethereum. So you get not only Bitcoin, but especially in any city, you get crypto curious people. So it was interesting and just like super nice people. I don't know what I was expecting, but everyone was super nice, super friendly. It was great. Great chatting with them.
Find that in person.
Yeah.
So it's funny. You can kind of hold a mirror up to the kind of toxic online crowd and say, this is what happens in person.
Right.
And you never get that.
No.
Everyone's just super nice. Let's have a good conversation.
I had a 20-minute conversation with someone about like their kids and just like them raising kids. Like it was just amazing. Like connecting with people. And I think that's what we miss. And, I'm like, I need to get out to more of these things, and not just be on Bitcoin Twitter with all of this. It's nice.
So what's it like being a lefty Bitcoiner?
What's funny, Huddle last night was like, hey, Junseth, I found you a progressive from Massachusetts last night. Well, I think it's getting easier. I've connected a lot with Jason Meyer for sure.
Jason's great.
Yeah, I looked back at his show and I'm like, I don't want a repeat of that show, but there's so many things where I'm just like, hey, just go check out that show that he did, because that's a lot of the ways I feel about this divide. And I think the past year on your show, but in Bitcoin in general, has shown people Bitcoin is for everyone, but there's so many things I could say about it, because America, too, what I tell people, and you've said this a lot, like everything in America is left, right. I'll give you a good example. That train wreck that happened recently in Ohio with the chemicals, that's left, right in the United States.
So what's the left argument? What's the right argument?
Well, no, the left argument is basically saying the right is, there's a lot of like conspiracy theory on the right about this. And the right is saying the left doesn't care, this happened. The reality is that's a crazy thing that happened. Can we just report on it?
Yeah, it doesn't help. Then there's another derailment a few days later in Detroit.
Exactly. So again, it's one of those things where if the right's saying it, the left's like, what's going to be our opposing point to it? But then again, you have mass shootings in this country and the right is mum about it. And the left is talking. So every issue, there's going to be something.
But you need guns to protect yourself from an authoritarian government.
Right. I've heard that.
I think personally,
someone else talked about that last night too. That was interesting.
Junseth brought it up.
Yeah.
Look, if you want your guns, have your guns.
That's how I feel.
What's his name? The fucking comedian got it best. Google him. Australian comedian, guns. You've never seen this guy?
No, I almost thought you said, I feel like Jim Gaffigan.
Yeah, Jim Jeffries. You've seen this.
Okay. He sounds familiar.
You've never seen this?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, you have to see this. So this guy talks about guns and he's like, look, I accept your Second Amendment rights to protect yourself. I accept that. He says, but what I don't accept is lies and bullshit. There's one reason and one reason only to own a gun. And he says, because you fucking love guns.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And like all this bullshit they use to mask or justify little kids getting shot in schools.
Yeah.
I just find it repugnant. Just stop lying.
Yep.
This is bullshit.
Yep. And so someone on Twitter, people can look up the tweet, posted yesterday. I felt really strong about this. They posted a picture of a hardware wallet and they said, I never understand Bitcoiners who don't like guns. That was the post. And then Anita, I'm blanking on her last name. Yes, Anita Posh.
Dan Hell tweeted it, I think.
Yes, Dan Hell tweeted it.
Was it Dan Hell tweet? Well, Dan likes guns.
So, which I'm fine with. I'm definitely in the, I'm more of like, when I think about myself in progressivism, I'm still definitely like, libertarian leaning progressive, where I'm just like, you guys can do whatever you want. But when you start conflating guns with Bitcoin, you're going to turn people off. And that's what I've talked to a few people on the right about. I'm like, listen, I have a lot of respect for you. And like, because I'm into Bitcoin, I can look past your bullshit, but some people who aren't into it associate it. And my wife and I talk about this all the time. And a lot of my friends, like, I know they would associate it with Ted Cruz, with guns, and that's the problem. So it's just that difference where I'm like, I don't personally care what you do with that, but conflating that, and Anita pointed it out, and she's like, luckily, you don't have to like guns to be into Bitcoin. And I commented, and I was just like, thank you for saying that. And then there was a lot of like shit posting after that. A lot of people were like, oh yeah, that's great. Bitcoin's for everyone. And I've met most people, even those that are on the right, that are getting around to understanding. People that used to shit post like that a lot are getting around to understanding Bitcoin is for everyone. And I've seen that message shifting. But real quick before we lose the thought, back to like what's it like being a progressive in Bitcoin. So, and I got into Bitcoin in like 2021, like early 2021, and listening to like honestly Willie, Alex Gladstein, couple of your first shows with them had me see that Bitcoin is like, okay, this global thing. Yeah. And so that allowed me to get into Bitcoin. And then I researched it on my own, kind of ignoring Twitter for a bit, just reading books. Then I got back on Twitter, and one of my first like encounters with someone big, I was probably like 4 or 5 months into Bitcoins, with Saifedean. And if this had happened my first day into Bitcoin, I mean, I still would have been into Bitcoin, but for some people that could be a real turnoff. He was posting about like classic, like states, meats, carnivore diet, whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm a vegan. How do you feel about that? Whatever. And I wasn't even shit posting. I forgot what it was, but he like was like, oh, I'm sorry, you're malnourished. And like really dug in deep. And I was like, holy shit. Like that was pretty dark. It was pretty aggressive. Like this dude doesn't know my diet. I don't know his, like, I'm not saying that you can be a healthy carnivore or whatever. And then he immediately blocked me. And I'm like, dude, I have like 300 followers on Twitter. That is pathetic. Like it was so funny. I'm still blocked to this day by him, but I love the Bitcoin Standard. Like I still would recommend that book to people. It's just so funny but that was a couple of years ago. Well, I do think the tide's turning. I really do.
Well, the vegan thing makes me laugh. The healthiest I've ever been was when I was a vegan.
Yeah, I've heard you say that a lot.
I was in great shape. I felt good, slept well, my skin was good. I was running fast. Yeah. I got my 10K down to... Did I get my 10K down to 47 minutes?
Wow.
And I used to be a 1 hour 10K guy. Yeah. And then I got my 5K down to 22 minutes, I think. Mm-hmm. Like I was fast. I was light. I felt great. My only problem with it is I feel like the only way to be a healthy vegan is you have to prep your meals. You have to be very good at that. If you're eating out and eating from...
For you guys, it's tough. I mean, going around and doing it. In New York, it's a bit easier, but... even where I'm at in Boston, it can be tough.
Yeah, and that's what happened that first year when I made all my meals. I was super healthy and great. And then when I went back to work, I just struggled with it. Yeah. I often think of going back, though. I felt so fucking good. Yeah. I mean, Rich Roll was there last night. Do you know Rich?
So I know of Rich. That was really cool when you said that. I was like, because I knew of Rich before. Like, I know of him. I didn't, like, dive in deep or anything, but that was way before Bitcoin. And so seeing him there, I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. Probably crazy for you, too. Like,
well, I mean, he's the guy who got me into Bitcoin. Bitcoin's got me into podcasting. Yeah. And, like, he's been a bit of a mentor and a good friend. And it was just this lucky coincidence. He was in town, so he came out, and it's quite funny because those two worlds conversion of Bitcoin and Rich Roll have really freaked some people out. They're like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
But the vegan thing, I mean, look Saifedean's going to block and shout at everyone for all kinds of reasons for people who disagree with him. That's his fine. That's his shtick. But the progressive thing is important, and there's like an alignment with that why it is that. Bitcoin adoption and understanding awareness is going to grow and scale quicker than a core ideology of no seed oils, carnivore, guns. Yeah. And so we recognize that. Me and Danny talked about it a lot last year. We were like, this is growing quick. Yeah. And the most important thing for conservative Bitcoiners is that they embrace progressive Bitcoiners. Yeah. Or they embrace progressives and teach them about Bitcoin. Yeah. And you have a united front on this one issue. Yep. Because if you don't, all you're going to do is bring regulation and threats to Bitcoin. Yep. And so the most important thing, like I said, Jason Meyer's book is the most important book written for conservatives. Yeah. And so we embrace it. I think it's been great. I think sadly, because there's been a lot of weird shit, especially like you see a lot of it on that Libs of TikTok. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens on the left. People assume everyone who's a progressive is on that super weird end.
Yeah.
Which is not, and I find that's like conflating the white nationalists with everyone on the right.
Yeah.
You've got to forget these fucking crazy people and just listen to the real conversations that people are having about these policies and ideas.
Yeah, and I'm equally, well, it depends on the issue, equally critical of the left for sure, because I'm like, you guys, especially during COVID, I was like, you're being fucking annoying. Like, you're being really annoying, and you're actually drawing people to those fringe groups because of how annoying you're being on policies that shouldn't have been enacted, or like more totalitarian leaning, we want the government to be in every aspect of your lives. Like that's not, and I'm progressive not in that way, but a lot of people just don't think about it. So I'm definitely equally critical of that, and it is annoying. But I'd say on the right, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners, the Bitcoin OGs and the people I really respect in the Bitcoin community who are on the right, when I've talked to them, when I've interacted with them or messaged them or spoke to some of them last night, they're great people. And they're like, dude, Bitcoin's for everyone. Like that's our core belief. The others are just clickbaity and loud, and they actually don't matter to Bitcoin. Some of them, I think, I try to remind people like, hey, when I show something like this to my normal friends, they're like, you guys are fucking crazy. Like, I'm like, you got to remember, in your echo chamber, it sounds like, oh, we all get it, but to a normal person, they're like, what does that even mean? What are you talking about?
Guys, you need to check out this new decentralized form of money that's out of state control. It's going to be really good, because that means the government can't touch money.
Yeah.
And you don't want the government in your money, because the government, they're really fucking bad at managing money. So basically, we're going to run all these machines all around the world, and they're going to do this thing called mining and build this blockchain so we can spend this money.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah.
What the fuck did you just say?
Like, back up, like, I mean, and think about it. Like, how long did it take you, or how long did it take me or others? And who said it recently? Maybe it was Troy said something about like, you don't have to understand like, you're always going to be learning something new about Bitcoin. Like, even me just being in it 2 years, I just started to grasp some of the concept maybe a year in after reading a lot. And I think that's how you have to approach people. But I also, last night I was talking to someone and also said, like, everyone has their role in Bitcoin. You're going to have the people that need to talk to government officials. You're going to need the people that are like, no, screw this. Like, we hate the government. We're anarchists. You're going to need the liberals. You're going to need the people on the right. You need every type of person using their specific gifts and focus. You don't need everyone to think that we need to ally with the government for Bitcoin. That would probably be bad. But also, you can't have everyone being like, screw the state. We need to end the government. Anarchy now and Bitcoin only. You need that depth, and that's what we're seeing more. And I think getting those voices out there is really important.
Well, that's the rich tapestry of life.
Yeah,
which Bitcoin will become part of.
Yeah,
or is part of.
Yeah,
and will spread throughout.
Yeah,
but what won't happen is we won't have this Bitcoin monoculture.
Right.
That scales to 8 billion people. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the sooner some people accept that some people see the world differently from them, expect different laws or different ways to organize society, the better, because I think they're going to get very disappointed, and their ideas will become more fringe and more niche, and they'll probably just become more angry.
Yeah.
But they're not going to change anything doing that. Like, going on Nostr or Twitter and yelling at somebody has zero effect.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you look good.
No.
It doesn't change anyone's mind.
Yeah.
What does work is conversations where people try to come to the table and share ideas and work around things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with Bitcoin. Like, with someone like Elizabeth Warren, I mean, look, I'm a hypocrite here because I've been very critical of her on Twitter, but at the same time,
she's going to be one of your secret guest stars every episode.
I hope so, man. But I'd love to sit down with her. Like, just sit around a table with someone like her, someone like Alex Gladstein, maybe a Troy Cross, and just educate and say, look, we understand your fears.
Yeah.
We understand what your concerns are with this. But look at what, like, if you try and stop Bitcoin working, which, by the way, you will never stop it, but if your attempts, what you're trying to stop is, look at this project in Africa. Look at this project in Texas. Look at this project in El Salvador. Look at this project in the UK. Look at this project in Indonesia. This is everywhere, and it's improving people's lives. And why are you trying to stop that? What is it you're trying to fucking achieve here?
Yeah.
But you need to be able to have those conversations, and you need to meet them where they are, not have two people yelling at each other, not Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren yelling at each other. It just doesn't work.
So it's funny because being on this show and in general, I do want to bring a message of like hope for Bitcoin and on Bitcoin. But I've heard you say this a lot about Elizabeth Warren recently, and she's one of my senators in Massachusetts. She was in there before I was, probably able to vote. She's been in there a while now. But one of the things I will say that I wanted to bring up to you is that, to presuppose, okay, get them at the table and talk. And again, I'm, registered Democrat, like vote in Democratic Party. I don't think I've ever voted for a Republican. No, you know what? No, I didn't.
But you're not saying you wouldn't.
No, I'm not saying I wouldn't. And also at this point, it's hard for me to figure out who I would vote for if I would going forward. That's kind of where I'm at with
the DNC is so broken.
Yeah, so I don't like anyone from there, and anyone that could aspire to be a rising star in politics. They're 2 or 3 months into the campaign, you see them starting to change already because the message has been written. So that would be my point on Elizabeth Warren. You mentioned we should educate their staffers. That's presupposing that they are open to begin with, and they already have their message delivered to them. Like I've reached out to a few congressmen and senators in Massachusetts, and they have it's almost copy paste the response I get. And it will be, I've actually had back and forth with their staffers through email. With my congressman a few different times on a few different things, and their staffers have written to me, and their staffers are really great. Like you really feel like you're connecting with a person, the director of research, whoever, and it's usually the same. It starts off positive because they want to make you feel you're heard. So what they say is crypto is this revolutionizing technology. It's clearly here. It's okay. So they're at least acknowledging that crypto is something that's legit, and they're not like ban crypto now. Okay. But then they get into Bitcoin uses more energy than half of the world, whatever, like Norway, Sweden, whatever. They copy paste the same thing. And they're like also, so it's energy use and money laundering. That's still and they say crypto. I specifically wrote about Bitcoin saying I'd love to. And I sent these folks a couple of articles, connected them to Satoshi Action Fund, other for Bitcoin Policy Institute, others like legit people who I'm like, they're doing legit research. It's not just like Bitcoin to the moon or, whatever. It's like, these are legit research folks. You should check them out.
Yeah. Stop listening to DeFreeze.
Yeah. Right. So they've already decided what they're going to think on it. And I don't think there's any way of having that conversation. And I say that as a progressive who voted for a lot of these people. So I don't know what the answer is there. And I think the free market will, over the next couple of years, you'll probably see them shift. That would be my expectation. You'll see them shift once enough people or constituents start to see what this is and when it gets here. I don't know what the timeline is for that, but
well, that's why someone like Jason Meyer is so important, and what he's doing is so important.
Yeah,
is get that education out there.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of work out there appealing to people who are conservatives or libertarians. Yeah. They get it, generally get it. Not everyone, but there's a broad understanding of what this means. Yeah. And it aligns nicely, certainly with American conservatives. Yeah. It's less so in the UK because there's a different mindset. The UK conservatives are more just fiscally conservative. Yeah. They're not so much freedom conservatives. Yeah. But at the same time, what we need is conservative senators across the aisle, conservative people to put their hand out to their progressive friends and say, look, let's just talk about this one. Yeah. And I think it's just one thing we can all align on and say the incentives of this benefit everybody. Yeah. Yeah. Like this is a win-win-win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah, and it affects and wins for everyone in different ways. Yeah. That's the cool part. So as a progressive, a United States progressive, it can appeal to you in blank way. As an African nonprofit worker, it'll appeal to you in this way. In China, it will appeal to you. So each way, there's a different story because it is. I remember I was talking to my wife about it early on, and she's like, "If it's just money, that's a neutral thing. It's money, right? So why is it?" And I'm like, "Well, there's a lot of reasons. It's politicized, and for good and bad reasons. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'd love to see it. And I think Junseth alluded to this last night. I'd love to see it as boring old money. Yeah, that would be really cool." If in my lifetime we could see that, that's my hope. And that this politics stuff of the past will be like, that was crazy.
Well, ordinals are making it less boring, but we don't need to really get into that.
Right, yeah. I don't have a say on that. I don't know.
So I haven't really done an intro for you because not everyone listening will know who you are. Do you want to just give a bit of your background, talk about the work you do?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Trey. I'm currently a director in a nonprofit focused on youth workforce development and So my undergrad about 10 years ago, I was a sociology undergrad and still really passionate about sociology, social theory. Not to go too much into it, but I was really trained up and studied Marxism and was really, I consider going to the New School here in New York City. I was very, if you say, oh, who's going to end up in Bitcoin? I don't, that concept, right, of definitely into Marxism, social theory,
You're a commie?
No, not anymore. And even then, it was more like social theory. Like I really enjoyed reading radical ideas of a lot of like New Age philosophers, leftist philosophers, things like that. And so that was like sociology, social theory. And then I got into nonprofits in 2015, actually working with young people with disabilities. So that was my first, and I think my driving thing in life has been, and I went to a Christian college as well, no longer a Christian, but I think the one thing that kept with me is, in Christianity is kind of like Jesus fighting social justice. And that's the one thing that definitely stuck with me always is like, fighting for those that have less, just social justice and everything. So working with people with disabilities, that got me into nonprofits. And that's one of the largest minority groups, if you will, in this country that doesn't have a lot of rights, and started working with them, which was really, really cool. And since then, I've been really passionate about working with young adults and leading programs that help young adults get ahead, find economic self-sufficiency, especially low-income young adults, and just navigate this world. And I myself, I'm 30, I'm a millennial, but this younger generation faces even different and new challenges. So that's where I found myself now is just really passionate about workforce development, young adults, having them to get into career pathways and get into things. And I think Bitcoin can be a part of that. Navigating that in my current role and in Massachusetts in general we're still really early. So that's been interesting. But yeah, that's a whole intro.
Well, you wrote this article, Bitcoin creates hope for a generation found hopeless.
Yeah.
And we'll share that in the show notes so people can go and read it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
What is it you're noticing then amongst young people? What is this like hopelessness you're seeing? Like I see it. And I have 2 kids as well.
Yeah. I think in general, it's kind of, definitely COVID was a big thing. So I've been in my current role for like 4.5 years now, and a lot of my staff go into schools and work with students. So during COVID, we were all virtual. And I think it's one of those things, it's not a cognizant, youth are outright coming and speaking up about what's troubling. They're young people, they're teenagers. But what we're seeing is just like COVID had such a big effect on school-age kids all over the world, but in the United States as well. And I think what you're seeing is just the biggest, and what society is doing. I think they're holding up incredibly well, given what they've been through. And especially like some of these young adults we work with, they are 15, 16, and they're working, jobs until 9 o'clock at night, also providing for their families because they're immigrant family or their parents might be undocumented, whatever. So there's these kids that are really like carrying their communities and really doing cool stuff. And society's like, what was that recent Wall Street Journal article that was saying, okay, it's millennials and the younger generation buying too much. That's why inflation keeps going up. Right?
Yeah.
So it's even,
what the fuck was that all about?
Yeah, it's petty stuff like that, but it's also like Greta Thunberg saying the world is burning, like we have to do something today. So I think that overwhelming unconscious pressure they did it to millennials with my time, and they're doing it to Gen Z now. Just saying like, you guys are going to pay, Social Security and probably not get any back. You guys need to fix the planet because the older people don't care about it. And that's also presupposing that if you're older, you can't change your ways or whatever the case may be. So it's basically like, what are you guys going to do about it? And a lot of times it's spun in this message of hope, but really it's overwhelmingly just suffocating, I think, to young people. And so for them to actually thrive in this world, it's really challenging. And obviously from this article, I think one of the ways is Bitcoin and the whole ethos of it, not just the technology, but.
Yeah. And I think there's other pressures on kids these days. 2 pressures that really stand out to me. Parents aren't about as much. Like I'm conscious myself as a parent, the amount I've worked, the amount I've focused on a career ahead of spending time with my children. I'm away for a week, 2 weeks at a time. Yeah. I'm conscious of that. And I'm fortunate to have the job I have, but some people out of like, they've got no choice. They have to work 1, 2 jobs. Both parents have to work. They just don't have the time to parent. Yeah. And parenting has been kind of pushed to media. Mm-hmm. And we've got these addictive social media platforms that are, well, God knows what they're doing to their brains. But I think there's this unrealistic career life goals that it's putting in front of them. Because when I grew up, so when I was, the internet was I was about 14 when it came around. So, you went to school and you knew you were going to pick a particular vocation, and you would go to university and you work hard and you get a job.
Yeah.
Now, with the internet, you have young people seeing other young people become fabulously rich by doing things on the internet. And all they're seeing is success stories.
Yeah.
It might be a 16-year-old playing for Manchester United.
Yeah.
It might be some young girl who dances on TikTok, has 100 million followers, and you see articles that live in these big mansions or youngsters driving cars. Like, that's what they see, and that's what they aspire to. And I think a lot of them are missing the reality. Actually, no, life's just really hard. Like, none of you are going to do that. Like, a tiny fraction. Most of you are going to have to work hard at school and then get a job.
Yeah.
And then you can throw in another layer of pressure in this. It's like a lot of the jobs that they're perhaps preparing for are not even going to fucking exist.
Yeah, that's the whole scary part too. And, working in workforce development, that's kind of one of your jobs, is to try to figure out what is that going to look like in 5-10 years? Because a lot of the young people we work with, or I'm passionate about working with or running, in my director role, a lot of this is my staff doing these things. And I try to just support funding and have conversations with people about why they should care about this, or why they should invest in these young people. So we're projecting out 5-10 years, right? So what are those jobs we can help them get into now that can be that trajectory? And that's the challenging part. Not only that, I think really I get passionate upset about is like, we can make things a hell of a lot easier on young people. And I'll say just to the US context, but it applies worldwide. We can make things a lot easier for young people, whether you talk about like outrageous costs of higher education. And no, I don't think the only answer is debt cancellation, right? Because then what does that do to continuing payments? That's a whole nother topic, but college is too expensive. Training programs might be too expensive. Employers, they might get a job, but then we've seen layoffs this year. So we could be heading for a recession. Could be more serious or not, we don't know. So they're going into these companies and these organizations, if they are lucky to get a job, and we're not making things easy for them things shouldn't be easy. Let me put it that way. And these young people, I think the biggest misconception is, they're lazy and they just don't want to work. No, the young people we work with, they're like super excited to get out there, and they're young. They're excited about life. They really are just like viewing the world that way. Even though some of us that are a bit older, and maybe it's my millennial angst too, is like, man, this world's kind of hard sometimes. Like, and us Bitcoiners, there's hope, but there's also a message of like, oh man, all of these guys, they're the bad guys and no one knows it but us type thing. And that's a little bit extreme, but it's partly real. And I think a lot of these things, especially politicians, in action, I don't think they care at all about a lot of people, but about this younger generation coming up. So we have to
they only care about themselves.
They only care about themselves, but I think also sometimes it's not even awareness. I think, it's tough when you don't have term limits. You come in and that becomes your career. And so you're focused on getting book deals and speaking, not necessarily on, all right, I got 5 years.
What can I do for my constituents?
Yes, that is few and far between. And I will say there are probably many out there. But I think you've mentioned this before too. Some people get co-opted, or you get into it and then you get comfortable, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, where was that fighting spirit? Where did that go?
AOC.
Right.
Like, I know she isn't popular with a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people listening, we were like, what the fuck are you on about? When AOC first came through, she was a ray of hope.
Yeah.
I mean, she might have been completely wrong on some issues.
Sure.
But she had a fight in her.
Yeah.
And now she's just been co-opted into the same bullshit.
I think it's tough. I think some of it is, okay, you want to try to get, inspire hope and change in people. So you have to be a bit bombastic at times. And what I do like about her is that there aren't many people in Congress, like even if you just follow her on Instagram, she shows you what a day in the life of so regardless of what you think of her politics, she shows you what a day in the life of a congresswoman looks like, which is kind of cool. Like, people aren't transparent about what it actually is. But then, I'll see some talks or some interviews or some like the panel, the House panel, whatever, where they're just like, this is my moment. This is my 30 seconds to blast this guy or this tech CEO. And I'm like, what did that do for your constituents? What did that do for this country? What did that do for young people? Nothing. But I get it. And a lot of us who would be in the same position, would we do any different? I'm not sure, because that machine is terribly grinding the political machine that these people fall into.
I think there's a few pillars of this that are causing problems for kids. I think politicians.
Yeah,
I absolutely do. The financial system, in a number of ways, has damaged kids in that there's no money for kids anymore. No. When I grew up, we used to have these things called youth clubs. Do you have youth clubs when you? Were they gone by then?
Yeah, I never really went to a youth club.
But they were a thing, and it would just be Friday night, Thursday night, whatever. You go along, you play pool, play football, and a group of people hang out. They all eventually got closed, and then football playing fields went.
Yeah.
There's just never any money for kids. There's a crash in the economy and the government suddenly needs 40 billion. That money appears.
Right.
Can you imagine they suddenly found 40 billion for kids? How many playing fields, parks, like how many things you fund? They never find that money. They always find it for the things they need.
Yeah.
So I think the financial system hasn't helped. I think the social media companies are drug dealers.
Yeah.
And
I would agree with that.
As somebody who is a previous addict and has definitely been addicted to Twitter, it is fentanyl to kids.
Yeah.
I also think the education system hasn't evolved for life. I mean, there's a really great TED talk. I think the guy sadly died. He was a teacher. And he talked about this kid who liked to dance and everyone missed it. And he said, these kids now, we have the internet now, and these kids now, the jobs, the things he's teaching them now, they won't even need to learn in the future. Like Rich Roll, like I always steal this line he said to me. He said, the problem with schooling is we give these kids a supercomputer in their pocket and then we teach them to go and memorize facts.
Yeah.
It's fucking pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole education system needs a complete rethink.
Yeah.
We need to create people, not mini computers who can remember things.
Yeah. And I think too, you talk a lot about this a lot on your show. And I think your show obviously talks about Bitcoin. And I think the directions you want to head is expand that too. But you talk a lot about too, and for your European listeners and others, even in the US, like how different the US is in that we have states and we have the federal government. So you talk education, that's very, I mean, the federal government, yes, but that's dictated at the state level. So Massachusetts is going to look very different than Virginia, than Texas, than California, whatever. And each city as well, and each town, they have their school board. They have a lot of control. So as with anything in politics, of what remnant of hope you do believe, the local level impacts a lot. So in whatever ways Bitcoiners can get involved in a local level, or people that care about this stuff, not in a way of going to town hall and being like Bitcoin just for like a joke, like, funny moment. That's really where it's happening, and especially school boards. So we've seen some schools do some cool and exciting things. Like for instance, instead of just having a rigid school schedule where you have 6 or 7 like periods in a day where they go through the same classes, it's like freeing up a couple of those so they can go and do an internship outside of the school, or they can. So our big thing is we try to get students out into the community as much as possible, so they can interact with real companies, so they can figure out, let me try this out. Oh, I thought I liked that. I don't like that. Let me try this out, and just give them something that's outside. And also, teachers their job is to teach and follow the curriculum. And a lot of them, unfortunately, I think act as social workers sometimes, but their job also isn't to prepare them for the world of work or the economy, in 5 years, right? That's just it's not because they don't care, because teachers really do care. It's that's not their focus. So there's not a real focus on bridging that divide between school and what comes after that. And some people are better at figuring it out than others. And I think, I definitely am a firm believer in like, let them experiment and fail. And some students are going to thrive in that and some aren't. So there's always going to be risk associated. There's never going to be because we don't want to create an environment where we lay out the path of every person, through age 30. And it's like, okay, that's your trajectory. Now you'll be set. Like there's got to be some try and fail.
Yeah. And what about some problem solving?
Right.
What about teaching problem solving? What about teaching philosophy?
Yeah.
What about teaching? Like my daughter's at a stage now with her math. Like every parent will know this. She's doing stuff I do not use in life anymore.
Yeah, no.
And there's some kids who are great at math, and they're going to do math all the way through to 18. They might do further math. Yeah. They might study math at university. Great. That is a math kid who's going to take that into a job, and where they may be an economist or an engineer where that's super useful. My daughter, I know her. She isn't going to do shit with this math, right? She's learned everything she needs to know with
Sorry
math.
if she's listening.
English, I get it. English all the way through. Yeah. Great English skills, great writing skills, great comprehension skills. That's going to be useful.
Yeah.
Science, I mean, you get past a certain point again with science. Like, what does she need that for?
Yeah.
She's a creative person.
Yeah.
She should be spending a lot more of her time doing creative subjects. Mm-hmm. But all of this is a rigid structure, like you said.
Yeah.
I wish they would free them up. I wish they would do problem solving. I wish they would do finance. I wish they would do economics. I wish they would do more of life skills, because those are the skills that will transcend any like technical evolutionary changes that like kill off large parts of the job system.
Yeah.
You know, they will be useful life skills, but we don't do it.
Yeah.
We just create robots who compete on memorizing facts. It's fucking dumb.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's getting better in that regard, but I do think also we need to be real about what is school. Like school for a lot of people, let's say a lot of students that come from maybe like hard households or just in general is a place of hopefully stability. They can go during the day that the government in the US pays for. Their parents can go to work. And a lot of times, like, I don't remember anything from my high school days, barely college. But what I do remember from college, I remember those professors that had a profound impact on me and introduced me to topics and subjects that I researched. Similar to like, okay, this person had a profound Bitcoin on me or profound impact on me with Bitcoin. Same thing with high school or elementary school. It's you remember people and how they made you feel. So I think if we're real about education, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 22-year-old isn't going to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. I am a firm believer that you can always evolve. I mean, as you did with this podcast, right? Starting it like a few years ago, you were doing one thing, okay, pivot, something happens. I think that's real. So I think we just, again, like you said, teach students critical thinking, adaptability. Doesn't really matter the other subjects. You need to make sure they can read, right? You know, do those kind of things. But I think if we're being real, that's what education should be about. And unfortunately, I think sometimes it comes down to individual teachers and people. Is that the type of person they are or not? But the structure isn't set up for that now.
But you need them better teachers. You need to get better, brighter, more interesting teachers in there. And as long as
teacher shortage and staffing.
Because they don't pay them shit.
Yeah, correct.
They don't pay them shit.
And in the US, there's always there's a whole nother show we could have about the impacts of like COVID and just the societal angst everyone feels. But there's always, especially you guys in the UK and in Europe, even more so, but a lot more teacher strikes happening in the US, which again,
we've got that in the UK right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, healthcare is a whole other thing too. It's kind of similar in a way. And definitely like, I am definitely, kind of, registered Democrat, like proud of those that are striking, unionizing when need be and those kind of things. And first of all, I could never understand because I'm not in that position. But that's a reality. And there's not enough teachers in the system anyway. So a lot of them feel like they're used and abused. How well of a teacher do you think they're going to be if they feel like that? Yeah,
and Louis C.K. does a brilliant piece on teachers, and he talks about like they're the shittiest. Like he's Louis C.K., so he's making a joke. He's like, these are the shittiest people because these people, they get paid shit, and it doesn't matter how good a job they do. There's no career progression.
Yeah.
Like, and nobody says thanks.
Yeah.
And the point I think he's trying to make is that. Well, I tell you what, then let me explain it differently. Something that came up recently that stuck with me, I've talked about it on the show a bit, this interview I did with Dan Tubb, and we just looked at the government's budget from the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Yeah. This was the UK show.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yep.
71 billion is spent on education. 120 billion is spent servicing the interest of debt.
Yeah.
Not paying anything off, just servicing interest of debt. Again.
And the debt still exists. That's just the interest.
Yeah. The fuckos can build up this debt that has no consequence to them, but it has a consequence to everybody else. Imagine that 120 billion went into education. Imagine the education budget suddenly went from 70 billion to 190 billion.
Right.
You could double the salaries of teachers.
Right.
You will not have a teacher shortage.
Yeah.
You would be able to invest in getting good people into teaching.
Yep.
People who are smart, experienced, who can give these kids like, really fucking solid education. But you're not going to find these people while you pay them shit.
Yeah. And also the way we think of, and I say this as a progressive, as I'm not necessarily like a big government person, but I will say one of the things I've seen time and time again, it's complicated. It's funny. I was like driving around with my wife last week and I was talking about like this city where I'm at. And I live in Salem, Massachusetts. People know Salem from like the witch trials, that kind of thing. Great city. Love the community. But there's a couple of things they'll put up like some, mural or sculpture. Let's use that as an example. But then there's potholes all over the road. It's like, why don't you do what a city should do and fix the roads and leave the other stuff to like the entrepreneurs? So that's kind of how I feel about U.S. government as well. There's too many things the government is, paying high taxes for. And that's also something I like to tell my, progressive, more socialist friends is they say tax the rich. And it's like,
You already are.
But you guys, yes, you already are. But also, even if you do that, you guys also don't trust the government. You realize if we tax the rich, sure, it's less for them, but then they give it to the government that you guys say you hate anyway. So that, even if you think that there should be more, spread of the wealth and things like that through taxation, I don't trust that the hands those are going into, or what if Donald Trump's president, right? Let's say that their worst fear, right? Okay, the money's going to him. You guys do realize if we tax the rich, they're going to your enemy, or even whoever's in the White House or whatever. And obviously that's not how it works. There's a lot of different factions, but the government gets a lot of money. And I've seen this in my career, also just in this country in general, what happened during COVID stimulus, obviously, right? So the government got a flush of money. They threw that money out into communities. So like you said, there was actually more money, and is for a lot of these projects. Have we seen things change on the ground? Not necessarily, because they're like, oh, here's all this money. You have 2 years to spend it. You can't spend it on X, Y, and Z, or you can't staff up to actually address those things, or you can't hire more teachers, but here's a stimulus for, X, Y, Z. So it's just the complete mismanagement when there is, even if, especially Bitcoiners say, oh, the government shouldn't have more money. I agree with that. But even when they do, they still mess it up. So that's the biggest thing.
Wasn't it 70% of taxation comes from the top 10%?
I can have a look.
Yeah, I think it's
top 10%. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
If you said 1%, I'd be like, no. But 10%, that makes sense.
It might even be the 1%. I know it's a vast majority.
Even if it was 5%, I would understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, look, you can tax these people more, but the truth is that you.
Do you want to hear a cool stat? So Massachusetts, I forget that we had tax excess. This is the first time that I actually got a reimbursement.
What?
On tax. We had a tax excess of about $3 billion at the state level. As in, like, they collected $3 billion more than they had budgeted. Like, so they issue out a budget that came in, and we actually have a law. So Massachusetts is definitely liberal and progressive, but the one cool thing where I'm like, oh, this was the law. It was a law from the 80s that said if it's X percentage over what we actually budgeted for, we give it back.
So you've got a check.
Yeah, a pretty sizable check. And I don't, I work in nonprofits. I don't have a, it's not like a crazy income. And we got a decent sized check for just a tax refund, which I thought was cool, but also showed why the hell are you taxing that much? If you get it, and the government at least has a law where, luckily, I think if this were other states, we'd probably be in a trickier situation where they're like, cool, let's just use this for whatever. But Massachusetts is actually a law that says we have to give it back if it's over a certain amount, which I think is a cool, at least little, like, the switch was flipped and we have to give it back. So I'm like, at least that was a cool practice. So Massachusetts has some old school, like, practical, there's still, we had a Republican governor the past 2 years, Charlie Baker. He was the most popular governor in the country. But he was a little more practical, wasn't very fringy, and it was very weird in a place like Massachusetts. So we do have a weird mix of people in Massachusetts. It's not as Elizabeth Warren as one might think. Yeah.
Well, you can tax people only so much. There becomes a breaking point where people will just leave a country. Did you find it?
I can't find it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's 10%.
It was around there.
But I always think it's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
I think the answer is the government has to spend less.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? How do we get the government to spend less? You mentioned term limits. I think there should be term limits linked to budget responsibility.
Yeah.
I personally think any government which spends, hits a point where they spend more than they're bringing in, that should trigger an election.
Yeah.
And the electorate get to decide. Yeah, they get to sell why they're going to run a deficit, and the electorate get to decide. Yeah. Because that will flip the incentives, rather than every government saying, oh, we're gonna give you this. No, we're gonna give you this and spend more and more. You have another party coming back and saying, no, we're gonna cut spend here.
Yeah.
And this is why you should vote for us, because we're gonna work for you. The incentives are all fucking screwed.
Yeah, and I think Bitcoiners, we talk a lot about, like, slippery slope stuff. And I think that's one of the things that, whether it's CBDCs, whether it's deficit, stuff like that, when you talk to more, like, normal people, you see a gradual, Juice was talking about, like, gradual growth of things last night, right? You also see a gradual downfall. So it's never a overnight, you get this sometimes societal collapse overnight, right? But at least in the United States, it's this gradual chipping away. So part of me is like, we're really, really far down this whole incentive model where the new thing is, like, as much debt as possible. CBDCs, the political structure as it is. It's crazy to think, I think it was the early 90s with Bill Clinton. We didn't have a deficit. I'm trying to think the last time the US did not actually have a deficit, when now the deficit is the highest it's ever been. So it's not this.
And it's never going away.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I'm like, I don't think it's ever going away. And most people don't care about it. But in thinking about young people, I don't know what that's going to look like in 50 years. When you think about the ramifications of what this is and all the people that have been deciding that, they'll be dead and gone.
Yeah. Home ownership will be an issue. Social security will be an issue. Well, all these things will be an issue.
Yeah.
The boomers took it all. Yeah. Maybe what am I? What generation? I'm not a boomer. I'm just below that by a couple of years.
Gen X?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Last time the US had a surplus 70s, was 2001. 80s?
Okay, 2000. Yeah, that's wild.
Is that Clinton or is that Bush?
Don't know. Was that Bush?
That's Bush. Yeah, because it was 9/11. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. God, here in New York. The first time I came to New York was the year after 9/11.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it really stuck with me because they were still clearing the site.
Yeah.
And there was still kind of like, I don't want to say fire, but like smoky stuff coming up. And you saw the big trucks coming out, bringing things out. And I remember standing in a queue getting a slice of pizza and was talking to this guy. And he started, I was like, were you here? So I was in the city. I was down near where it happened. And as he started to tell the story, his whole arm started to shake.
Yeah.
I was like, you all right, dude? It's like, yeah, it's just fucking the worst day ever.
Yeah. Have you heard Corey's story on that from Swan?
No.
So I listened to his interview with Natalie a couple of weeks ago, and he said that he was here during 9/11. He was on his way down. He was saying it was like before he went to Chicago, and Corey can correct this or reach out, but he was here during 9/11. And he was uptown, and he was going to head back down. And he was planning on it, but he saw like, okay, I'm in Tower 2, Tower 1 was hit. So he's giving details, and I was like, oh my gosh, like he was here for it, and then gave his side of the story, which is crazy.
Have you found or have you noticed? Because I have, and it's only anecdotal evidence, but I've been coming to the US since then. That 2002 was the first time. Been here like 80 times. I used to spend most of my time on the coast, LA, SF, and here, and I've gradually been starting to go to places like Nashville and Texas. Yeah. I've noticed the decline mainly in New York and in California. Yeah. I've seen like visual decline in those cities. San Francisco particularly I still can't understand how they've let that city collapse into what it is. But I'm seeing it now here in New York. Yeah. New York, when I first came, was exciting. Yeah. But over the last 5 years, I felt a real decline. Yeah. I feel a little bit less safe in this city. Mm-hmm. I feel a little bit less excited. I feel like, I don't know, it's just, I feel like they've suffered the most. Yeah. Whereas I feel like Nashville and Austin are ascending.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of...
I'm asking that as a progressive. It's like
for sure.
It's a leading question.
No, and I'm glad you asked it too, because I hear a lot of Bitcoiners, constantly dump on the coast and things like that. And I do get it. And first of all, I've never been to San Francisco. I've been to Seattle. I've been to like San Diego area. San Diego is one of my favorite cities, beautiful out there. And then New York. So the one thing, and you would have more knowledge of this just going back more, and I definitely think there's been a decline for sure. And COVID really, really escalated that. And I think any progressive who refutes that is crazy. There definitely has been. But I think also I would push back and say some of these other utopias that Bitcoiners talk about, especially, Texas, Tennessee, utopias for who? Because there are a lot of folks that live in those communities, if they're not as wealthy, if they're people of color, if they're trans, if they're gay. Those states have tried to do a number on some marginalized communities. And again, people can comment and stuff, and I'm not going to, I don't go on Twitter and fight with people. It's just, exhausting. You can look up data on that. I'm not going to have data battles on that. But I do agree. I think it's happening on both sides. Just as New York, problems have been politicized, right? Like if we actually got people in a room together and was like, how are we going to figure out drug abuse and homelessness in New York City, rather than like, what is the proper Democrat response to that? What is the proper conservative? Because Democrat response, and I've had this in my own community, we had a bit of an issue with some homeless encampments creeping up to a really old, historic, beautiful part of the city. Some people were like, very reasonably so, were like, there's kids, and Salem's a big tourist town as well. So there are kids and families walking around, they see an encampment in front of Old Town Hall. What are we going to do about that? Some people were like, sounds like you're more care about the photo op than you do about these homeless people. That's a classic left response. On the right, they'll be like, oh, scum of the earth, what are they doing out here? Go get a job. Those are the two responses, rather than just like But there are a lot of people behind the scenes that aren't on Twitter that are actually sitting in a room, nonprofits, some government officials trying to figure this stuff out. But I definitely would say, I mean, just walking around here today, right? You see it, right by Washington Square Park, you see it. Now, is it as bad as 70s, 80s? Probably not. I don't know. I wasn't around then, but I would say it's not as, New York is still New York. Like whenever I come to New York, I'm like, this place is great. Like I do love it. But you do see some of the stuff that for me, I'm more like, this is sad. We should do something about it. That's usually one of my thoughts.
Take a trip to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Just see it with your own eyes.
Yeah.
Because
I know that's probably, if I had to just, upon trying to read a lot and seeing different things, I would say that's probably the worst.
You've got to see it to believe this is a major city. And what a city. Like the first, it wasn't the first progressive openly gay city, really.
Yeah, I mean, one of them for sure. Yeah,
and
late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, and like a beautiful city. I mean, I absolutely love. I remember the first time I went when I drove in.
Do you know when that was?
That was for my 30th birthday. So for my 30th birthday, we went to LA. We drove the coast up. So that was 14 years ago.
Yeah,
and I just thought this is a fucking cool place.
Yeah,
and you go there now, and you're like, I cannot believe the center of the city has collapsed to what it has been.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot go down a street without seeing homeless people. But it's, it was unbelievable. You saw it for the first time.
Totally blew my mind. Like you hear how bad it is, but we went for a drive through the Tenderloin and there's like 2 kilometers, would you say, of just like pure encampments. And
like Mad Max.
Like you can almost not walk on the pavement or the sidewalk because it's just full.
Yeah.
It's completely fucked.
Yeah.
And like something should be able to be done. Michael Schellenberger talked about this. I mean, he's written a very good book, San Francisco.
Yeah.
He's talked about this. It's mainly solving the drug problem.
Yeah.
But that, we seem to live in the richest times. Yeah. But for some people, we're living in the absolute poorest times.
We live in the time of the most excess and capital ever. And so that's the thing. And there's not good enough responses. No. And again, there's fringe responses. A lot of people in these positions are not intelligent, actually trying to figure out these problems. And I think that's the biggest thing, because we can address it. It won't be addressed overnight. It won't be addressed through Bitcoin, by the way. Bitcoin's not going to, cure cancer. It's not going to solve inequality. And I think most Bitcoiners are coming out and saying that at this point, which is good, because it's going to take a lot more than just that. But again, I think it's because we've politicized everything. Problems aren't problems anymore. They're, for the left, what is their approach? For the right, what is their approach? And it's because the political system is broken. And obviously, most of the listeners, and we know it's also the financial system is completely broken.
And media is broken.
Yes.
All
yes.
three.
And I would say that's kind of political.
of
media is I kind of tie that into politics, but for sure. Yeah.
Just circling back. So we should at least end on this.
Yeah.
Talking about the Bitcoin bringing hope to Gen Z. Can you outline what it is you think Bitcoin can do there? Because I've got 2 kids.
Yeah.
And if I try to think about how Bitcoin can help them, well, firstly, I mean, look, it's given me a chance to save money for their future. My kids will probably be able to get a house because I hold Bitcoin, but that's an economic thing. The only other thing I can think is hope is that Bitcoin is the tangential subjects to Bitcoin that I've opened my eyes to, that have made me parent them in a different way.
Yeah.
Teach them about different parts of life.
Yeah.
That's all I can, that's the only way I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I view it too. It's kind of like Bitcoin is that entry point, and then it creates the outline. And, I think a lot of this is in huge. I actually reached out to Troy and I was like, dude, I gotta thank you for everything you said on Bitcoin environment, progressivism, even though he focuses mostly on environment stuff. Just that was a huge inspiration for even going about and pursuing getting my thoughts out there on stuff like this. And Jason the same way, and so many others, Margot. So I kind of outlined it in 3 ways, like environment, obviously money, and then politics. And I think starting with environment, there's so many shows people can go and listen to from what you've done on this show, even recently, and other articles. But I'll start with mental health. So that was definitely a thing with this younger generation. And Danny, I think we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Just the burden that's placed on young people to, like I mentioned, to fix all of these problems. But and again, my background is in sociology. I have a master's in nonprofit management, so I'm definitely in a problem solving through nonprofits mindset. I'm not a social worker, any of those things. I'll definitely say that. But the mental health studies are very clear on what's happening with that. So definitely mental health with young people. And I think, again, a lot of the messaging towards them, whether it's environment, whether it's politics, whether it's money and finances, is all like, these people are not for you, they're against you, the world is burning. It's just a lot of pressure. And then add COVID into the mix, and it's a very overwhelming time for a young person. So really, outlining what I think Bitcoin can do for young people, for Gen Z, definitely environment. I think a lot of young people are really concerned about the environment, are constantly getting messages that climate change is here, that the ocean levels are rising, that we have too much carbon going into the atmosphere. And I align myself with a lot of environmentalists that talk about that. Definitely not one of those case closed, it's going to happen in this time frame type way. But one of the things I think is that there's a lot of evidence that Bitcoin miners, let's immediately start with, we can reduce methane emissions immediately right now with Bitcoin miners, or pretty short uptime, 6 months, right? Compared to other things. That's one of the biggest things, is addressing that, less carbon in the air. So Bitcoin mining can actually remove carbon and make that less carbon emissions. And I think if, to what extent are high schoolers going to go study that right now, I'm not sure, but it's going to help their future is what I'm saying. And some of them, if they catch on, that's great. I think political system, and, encourage people to follow up with me, also read the article, taking money out of politics, right? Going towards that Bitcoin standard with politics. I think that's a good start, for sure. And then I'm blanking on the other one that I mentioned in the article as well. So it's environment, politics, definitely finance. So just money in general, and talking with young people, like there's not, we were talking about CBDCs, it could be stripped of savings. Like people could be stripped of savings. And I think it's reintroducing the concept to young people of private property, of money that they can hold. A lot of young people, they're excited, like you said, of seeing TikTok and seeing like entrepreneurs. A lot of them want to be entrepreneurs and focus on that, whether it's realistic or not. Bitcoin is a way into that. And I think we're seeing a lot, like with the fun stuff you're mentioning on Bitcoin, we can introduce some of that. So, that's a quick outline, and definitely encourage people to check out the article. And there's a lot of other folks saying similar things. And I definitely don't want it to be a progressive only thing, but, I'll keep throwing that out there.
And are you working on anything else?
Not at the moment. So basically one of my goals for this year, my goal for this year, when I started off this year, I was like, I want to start writing and just get it out there. So I did that. And then that was like the second week of January, it went up on Bitcoin Max. I was like, oh, that's my goal for the year. So like, I need to, so I've been having a lot of conversations to people, connecting a lot with people, but I think really, I'm kind of in this middle road of, I'm definitely, fiat day job, trying to see how Bitcoin works in that, but also getting pulled more and more into these Bitcoin conversations with folks.
Does it to you, man.
Yeah. And I've been connecting with a lot of people around that, which is really cool. My biggest focus right now is trying to pitch Bitcoin to progressives, fighting against a bit in respectful ways against what I see as, far right, alt-right influence in Bitcoin, and saying, let's separate that garbage, because a lot of it is garbage. And then also the environment. Like I've been really jazzed up about Bitcoin mining and what that's doing for the environment. So I think for me, it's about progressive values in Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining for energy and, green energy.
Where do you stand on nuclear?
Love it for sure. Ben, I think it was recent.
Love it, man. I'm just building my own nuclear plant.
Yeah. I got out back. Yeah,
I've got some nuclear waste with me.
Yeah. It's funny. Salem, we just started an offshore wind farm project, which who knows how that's going to go, honestly, because they're not allowed to. Now, nuclear is being reintroduced, right? But I think if we want a stable grid, if we want clean energy that isn't CO2 emitting, nuclear is the only option. Solar and wind, you're not going to have enough uptime. So I think it's a no-brainer. Anyone saying that there's any question to it is ridiculous. They haven't read. You can read one article on it and be like, we got to do this. And luckily, I think people behind the scenes are knowing that, whether they're saying it outright or not. And we'll see more nuclear. I forget who the gentleman you had on recently was talking about kind of the micro nuclear processors, because Bitcoin mining definitely makes sense for like, that excess energy, like wind farms and solar, when there's excess power on the grid and they can pay cheaply to get that, right? Nuclear, it kind of have to be constantly tapped into. So I'd be very curious to see how it actually works out financially for those. I think TeraWolf, I believe, is starting to work with some nuclear generation in Pennsylvania, which is pretty cool. Really like that team out there. But nuclear's got to be the way, and it's going
got to be part of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely got to be part of it.
Yeah.
Well, listen, if people want to follow you, follow what you're doing, we'll put the link in the show notes. But how do people follow you?
On Twitter, Trey Walsh, and then I'm on Nostr too, and my Nostr pub stuff is in Twitter. So you can hit me up on Twitter. On Nostr, I usually just kind of goof around. So
wicked. Look, Trey, great to meet you. Love this conversation. We should definitely do it again sometime.
Pete. Yeah,
you take care.
Thank you.